I've been into the garden and fetched these 3 flower pots and some ivy, and I want to show you how I can put these into an interesting composition. Now I've drawn a small rectangle, it's no bigger than 2 by 3 inches, and I'm going to show you what this little arrangement looks like, so you can choose yourself. So we've got the 3 pots and the ivy comes something round here in this sort of arrangement, and as you can see it's not very interesting. Right, we're going to see if we can arrange these flower pots in a slightly better way than they are before. You might have to move them around quite a bit until you get it right, if you think they're nearer. I mean, I don't know whether the ivy looks okay there, but we're seeing the back of it. So maybe it might be better if actually we come around that way, or maybe this way. I quite like the idea of seeing more of the front of that. No, that's rather dark there. Let's have it as we had it before. I think that's better. Let's see how that goes. I've drawn another small rectangle and I'm going to put in the flower pots as I see them at the moment in my first arrangement, as I think they might look. Got to be careful of these ellipses here, they're quite important to get right, and as I'm drawing it I'm also seeing other things that I hadn't noticed before. I've got a bit of ivy out here. I'm seeing the shapes between, something coming in here and also coming out there, and I don't think that's too bad at all. I think the previous sketch we did was rather small within the shape, so I'm going to make this quite a lot larger and see what it looks like. So I'm really prepared to do quite a few different sketches to see which one I like the best. I'm putting a bit of tone on here that I don't know whether you've noticed, but also I'm trying to think, well, where's the light coming from? And it's coming from that direction, so that this side of my pot is quite dark and this one is also quite dark, so I'll just shade that in and see how that looks. Maybe that would be better within the shape. Don't forget that you've got all sorts of choices. You could make your rectangle upright, you could make your flower pots really large within the shape, so that you could sort of almost getting some sort of quite an abstract look to it. You've really got to think about this quite hard, and of course now I'm realising as I'm doing this that I can't see the ivy at all, so maybe this wasn't such a good idea, and that I'll go back to my third idea. I can only see a tiny bit of ivy in there, which is a pity, or just a bit out here. Do you remember to make these sort of small sketches? They only take a few minutes, almost seconds to do, and it does give you a choice. You're thinking about what you're doing, you're also thinking about shapes, spaces, colour, etc. You're doing your thinking here rather than making mistakes on your final sheet. Most people forget to do this. Right, I've drawn in an outline here, as I did before, to give me an idea of the general shape. I've made a centre line, a vertical centre line, and a horizontal centre line. So my centre is roughly there. I've then put in my centre lines for the pots. I've really got to make them look as if they're standing upright. I'm not so sure these are. And then I've also done it here. The other thing you've got to do is to do your ellipses, which you might find a little bit tricky. But what I've done is to do a centre line here and a centre line here, go around one line and hopefully follow it through into the other. through there and also here. I'm now going to step back and think, is it okay or is it not? I'm checking that shape, which is very important. It's a negative shape. Have I got that space right? Have I got that space right? I haven't drawn the ivy yet, but there's quite an important space in here. One thing I have noticed is that I don't think I've got this pot quite correctly drawn. I've made it look too long, so I'll have to take a bit of this off here. I'm not worried if my lines don't look quite right at the moment. I can always tidy them up later. So my next thought would be that I would put in some tone on it. Now I can see the lights coming. I'll put a little arrow here which will remind me. I can see that the light's coming from that direction, and it's actually, but this pot here is actually in shadow because it's behind the other one, so that's quite an important point to remember. We've got, I'll quickly shade in some of the areas here which are, this is quite lightly to start with, there and here, all down this side here. There's a nice change over there, light to dark, and also through here, and a little bit, you've got a little bit of dark in there, and certainly a little bit round here. You can easily get confused by these white shapes, white discolorations on the pot, and you think, how do I do those? Main thing is really to leave them alone. And you've got this lovely dark shape within this ellipse here, and maybe a bit of shading on here. So these are my first steps at putting some tone on. I'm using a 6B pencil, by the way. These ivy leaves are really dark in here, so I'd have to get down some quite detailed work here. I'm still quite prepared to think, well, if it looks wrong, I'm prepared to alter it. And I'm not worried that if the line, you see that line doesn't connect up with there, which isn't particularly clever, but I can easily change that. Right, I'm going to continue with doing some more work on this side. I'm correcting the shapes as I go along. I'm using a sort of cross-hatching technique here, quite fine really. And of course the main thing I can see here is that the ivy is very dark against the light side of the pot. And also there's some quite interesting shapes left in here, which you could say were negative shapes. There's one there which is quite important. You can also put quite a lot of nice detail on the ivy. There's a light side and a dark side and a highlight. You could get quite lost in this if you wanted to bother to do it. But also it makes a nice spiky shape in contrast to the pots. If I feel it's not quite right, I can change it. And also the tone is quite dark here, so that would make the pot stand up in front of it. There's a bit of a muddle in the middle. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. But generally speaking, it's a dark area against a light area. And also, of course, there's a shadow, which I've only just spotted, and maybe that would have to go in. That would have to go in later. Now, I've been working over the drawing here. I've done some more work here, some more here, here and here. And I've really got to take stock of it now. And as I've done this dark part here, I've seen that there are other dark areas within the composition. Here, for instance, is a very dense dark shadow. So that there's quite a lot more work could go in on here. And as I do that part, of course I've seen that that is dark as well. I could also come back to here. I could make this line strong, and there's some rather interesting little breaks in here where it's an old pot, old ceramic pot here. And also this area is really quite dark in here. I'm still considering my ivy leaves in here, and I think that these also need strengthening up. So I would go all over it, strengthening up parts that I feel needed strengthening. And another point that, as I'm looking at it, I've thought of is that we haven't thought about the shadows coming off here. There's quite a nice cast shadow here and also shadows here. But also another thing which is quite important is rather isolated, our little composition, and you might feel that you want to put it in some kind of situation in the garden or in near a potting shed or something like that. So do bear that in mind. You want to think about what's happening in the rest of the picture as well. Now I've done a little bit more work on here, quite a lot more work really, as you can see. I'm been cross-hatching quite a lot, and as I'm doing it I'm thinking I really ought to do something on the shadows which come down here, which make these pots sit on the surface, which is quite important. And here is quite a nice shadow under here and around here as well, so that I could actually continue just a wee bit longer. It's important to keep your pencil sharp while you're doing this. It's very easily blunts. The other thing which you might find interesting is if you find that you're smudging as you go from one side to the other, use a bit of paper under your hand. Well, I hope I've been able to provide you with a framework with which to work and to give you a sort of structured approach. But of course the key to it all is practice, 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 and daily if you can, but just don't stop drawing.
Now available on DVD. Try these techniques yourself at home whenever you wish. The extended version of today's workshop is now available to order on DVD from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.